Hi, my name is Holly Hunter and this is my video for my Tableau 2 project for ISM 3011. So to get started, here is the data. So we looked over this a lot in Excel and then brought it over here. I decided to focus primarily on profit margin for this project. I figured it would give me the best information about how the company was performing and how products were performing without needing more cost information, which we weren't given for this project. So I started focusing on department profit margins, then I went to state, and then I went to product. I used a lot of bar charts because they were easy to understand and it presented my data in a very user-friendly way. So with that being said, here is my first sheet. I started with just a regional profit margin overview. I just kind of wanted to get an idea of how the profit margins looked per region, just to see if there was any direct patterns. I didn't really expect to see anything right away, but it was a really good overview. There was an interesting trend, which I'll explain more later, in the paper products here. You can see they are significantly more red or orange or lower than, say, the personal or even the grocery, but more on that later. So my second sheet here goes a little bit deeper than just the region. We're going to go into department. So I started with the grocery department and I looked at the profit margins for each of the individual items within that department. I didn't notice anything right away. Within each region, the products were performing pretty much on average the same. Nothing crazy for this first one. My third sheet is very similar to this last one. It's in the next department, which is personal. Again, you can see in each region the same products are performing on average about the same. We have a pretty positive profit margin on average. There's a few in here that are not performing as strongly, but on average it was a very positive, healthy profit margin. Going into our final department, which is the paper department, this is when I really started to see some interesting trends. So, you know how I mentioned earlier the paper department was not doing as well as the others. When I broke it down into the individual products, I could really see how poorly some of these were performing. And again, it wasn't by region because they're performing poorly in every region. But yeah, paper on average was not doing quite as well aside from these Kleenexes here as the previous two departments. So I decided to go from there and then break it down by profit margins per state. So I started out looking at regions, and the map, it just wasn't working because there would be a few states that were performing poorly in this region, a few in there, but like nothing overall where it's like, oh, this region is performing the worst out of all four. So I decided instead to scrap that idea and just select the states that had a profit margin below 20%. So we were really looking to be above that 20% mark. That is what's considered a good profit margin. So all of these states here, as you can see, are below that 20% profit margin. I also added the sales number here just kind of as a reference point. It's not super important, but it kind of gives you an idea of how they're performing beyond just the profit margin. So these are, again, all the states that have a profit margin below 20%. So the next sheet is where it really starts to get interesting. So I took all of those states in the previous sheet that were performing below what they should have been and looked at the individual products within those states that also had a profit margin below 20%. So when you select any of these bars right here, it'll tell you what department the product is in, what product it is, and then the profit margin, which is below that 20% mark in each state. So this, obviously you have your grocery department up here. If you go over, there's the paper product department, which you can see have some pretty low numbers, and then personal, which seemed to have a bit higher numbers than the paper, which we had seen that trend before. But again, all of these items are still performing below that 20% mark. So I took these last two sheets here and I combined them to make my interactive dashboard. So viewers or the company, whoever is looking at this, can click on any of these states and then see which items or products in that state are performing the lowest. So in Kansas, this foam soap has a profit margin of 0.8, which is not very great at all. If you click on another state, say Louisiana here, you can see all the different products in Louisiana that are likewise performing poorly. So that makes up my dashboard, and then for my story, start from the beginning here. We start with our overview, which kind of just gives you an overview of each department without going into too much depth. And then I have my 3 department slides here, which you start to get a picture of how each product is performing within that department and within the region. Those are these 3 middle slides here, and then we move to the state sheet, which shows you all of the states that have a profit margin less than 20%. Again, over to the products that are below 20% within those poorly performing states, and finally back to our interactive dashboard over here. Lost that for a second, but that is pretty much the story. What I would recommend for this company is that they look at the products that are performing poorly within each of these states, and they decide whether it is worth it for them to either choose a different marketing strategy for those products, and if it is not, if it's too expensive, or if they don't think it will benefit that much, or they don't think they can turn around the profit margin, then I would recommend that they eliminate those products entirely. None of these profit margins were a negative numbers, so they are not causing deficits for the company at this moment, but some of them were quite low, and most of them will need a boost or elimination before they become damaging for the company. So in conclusion, I learned so much from this project about the data and about Tableau. I had done 2 Tableau projects previous, but I had extensive instruction for both of those, and I kind of just had to follow the steps, and I didn't really have to take any action on my own. So for this project, I actually thought it was very useful that we didn't have very much instruction. I tried a lot of different strategies, whether it was sales or profit or even some cost behavior, different formulas before I kind of landed on profit margin. So I felt like that gave me a very good understanding of the data, and even though it took longer, I have a better understanding of Tableau and the ins and outs, and I am much more confident in my ability to use Tableau and to create a project like this. So this was one of my favorite projects, and yeah, thank you.